I, Jay Hansen, call the combined virtual construction industry energy board and residential and manufactured structures board meeting of March 16th, 2021 to order at 9:31 a.m. Debbie, could you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Chair of the Construction Energy Board, Jay Hansen.
That's me. I'm here.
Thank you. Vice Chair of the Construction Industry Energy Board, and representing the Electrical and Elevator Board, Thomas Kyle.
I'm here.
Representing the Building Code Structures Board, Gary Heikkinen.
Here.
Representing the Building Code Structures Board, Cale Zuschlag. Mr. Chair, Cale will be arriving late, so when he does arrive, let's just identify him, please, and the time of his arrival.
Thank you.
Representing the Electrical and Elevator Board, Heather Miller.
Here.
Representing the State Department of Energy, Blake Shalide.
Here.
Representing the Mechanical Board, Walter Cottle.
Here.
Representing the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board, John Camiller.
Here.
Also representing that board, Eli Volume.
Here.
Representing the State Plumbing Board, Matthew Roselle.
Here.
Also representing that board, Travis Argue.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we do have a quorum of the Construction Industry Energy Board.
I, Chair Hansen, rule the agenda and order of business approved if there are no objections.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to read the roll call for the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board?
I would rather you start with that.
Thank you. Vice Chair of that board, Rabi Taberholic.
Here.
Gordon Anslow is absent. James Austin.
I'm here.
Forrest Barnes.
I am here.
John Camiller.
Here.
Rich Fry. Mr. Chair, he is also arriving late, so if we can just identify him and the time he does arrive.
Thank you.
Emily Kemper.
Here.
Emily, thank you, Emily. Douglas Lathine. Douglas Lathine. It looks like Doug is having some issues, so if we could just identify him when he reconnects.
Okay.
Rich Tover.
Here.
Eli Volume.
Here.
Excuse me, Eli. Thank you. Mr. Chair, we do have a quorum of the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board.
All right. And I wish to apologize to all the members of the Residential, Mechanical, and Structures Board for my lack of respect. But at this time, I will rule the agenda and the order of business approved if there are no objections.
Okay, and Mr. Chair, would you take care of the minutes for the Construction Energy Board of February 9th, 2021, the draft meeting minutes?
Has everybody reviewed those minutes? And are there any objections to those minutes? Seeing none, those minutes will be approved. Do we do the same for the Residential Manufactured Structures Board, Debbie?
Yes, if the Vice Chair acting as Chair, Tamer Holick, if he would take care of those meeting minutes of January 6th, 2021.
Member, you have the minutes. Do you have any comments or amendment to the document? I hear none. I declare the minute approved as submitted.
All right.
Great. And Mr. Chair, if I may, the next Construction Energy Board meeting is June 8th, 2021. And for the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board, the next meeting is July 7th, 2021. As you may all have known, we have, with approval of the board chair, we have the April 7th meeting has been canceled. So the next meeting is July 7th. If everyone would write that on your calendars, please.
Okay, Debbie, do we have any public comments scheduled for this meeting?
Mr. Chair, the policy analyst will handle that.
Andy, would you like to address any general public comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy Boulton, policy analyst for the division. We have not received any requests for general public comment this morning, but we do have several requests for comment on item 5 on the agenda, and we'll address those as well when we get to item 5.
All right. Mark, for the Construction Industry Energy Board, would you like to address program updates?
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Through the Chair, Mark Heizer with the division here today to give an update for the Construction Industry Energy Board, some of the pieces that are happening. Want to give everyone thanks for moving forward on the adoption of ASHRAE 90.1 2019 as our new energy code for the commercial Oregon Structural Specialty Code. April 1st is coming upon us, and thank everybody for all the other work that they have done on the residential energy provisions, and of course the work today to look at an aligned REACH code to go with the residential energy provisions. April 1st is fast approaching. We're hoping, just thanks to all of our staff, they're working diligently to get those documents ready and available for everyone. Also, want to say that Andy Boulton is back with us from having spent some time away from us, working on helping getting COVID vaccines out to everyone. He will back to work as our policy analyst, and also want to make a pretty big announcement that we do now have we no longer have an acting director. We have a new permanent director for Building Codes Division. Alana Cox was selected to take over that position. So no longer as an acting director. So she's no longer available for an Oscar nomination. So we really want to give her thanks on that one. So, and that's it for the current, for the Energy Board update. I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Let's see. We'll move on to some program updates with the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board. Tony, are you available for a program update?
I am, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of both boards. For the record, Tony Rocco with the division. Just a brief update for the boards today regarding the structural fire life safety side of the program. Our technical team is currently working through the publishing process with ICC for the 2021 RMSB, and that great work that the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board just worked through. And as part of that work, our technical team is also compiling a training presentation regarding the code update. We also have some supplemental documents outlining the significant changes, very similar to the matrices you're familiar with at the board meetings and committee meetings. And we're hoping that those resources will will all be available on Residential Structures Program webpage in the near future. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Tony? Seeing no hands, we will move on now to new business. No, I'm sorry, excuse me. Communications. Do we have any communications? No, we don't. So now we will move on to new business. Debbie, do we start with Alana or Mark or Keith to make a presentation at all about any new business?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we will start with Administrator Cox.
Alana, do you have something for us here?
Yeah, thanks, Chair Hansen, Chair Tamer-Hulay, members of the board. Thanks for taking the time to meet today. For the record, I'm Alana Cox, Administrator of BCD. Before we dive into the issue before us, I want to back up a little bit and talk about how we got here. So about this time last year, a couple of things happened that impacted our plans for code adoption. The first, of course, was COVID, and I really want to thank all the board members for your flexibility as we worked our way through board meeting cancellations and then phone conferences and then these video conferences we're all growing more used to. And then the other factor that impacted our plans was a new executive order, EO 2004, that came out about this time last year, which includes a series of requirements related to energy efficiency, one of which is adopting the REACH code on a 3-year cycle. So over the summer, we worked our way through residential code adoption, and I don't think anyone would deny it was a pretty challenging code adoption process. Some of that was due to COVID, and some of that was due to some process confusion. So this coming summer, I want to dig in and work on our process rules around code adoption. I want to clarify and expand them with the goal in mind of everyone kind of having a clear, predictable idea of what code adoption will look like going forward. This particularly applies to energy efficiency, which have been a growing focus of the code and for which there are different needs, like who models what and when, and according to what standards. And we also need a clear and predictable process for REACH code adoption. So I will look to all of you to help with that. As members of our boards and our stakeholders, you're familiar with our code development process, and we want to see where there's some room for improvement and kind of come up with a plan together so that we have that ready to go. There was also a desire last summer to work on REACH code adoption, and we committed to kicking off a residential REACH code process once we had a residential code approved by the board. So we did that. That brings us to where we are today. We're about to adopt several codes on April 1st. Electrical, plumbing, commercial energy, residential code, clarified administrative chapters for residential and commercial code. That's a lot of code making in the midst of a lot of challenges. And I think it's a big accomplishment that we got all that work done. We intend to get back on an October 1 cycle for next time. So we're going to have kind of a shortened code cycle this time around. We're also right now in the middle of legislative session. And generally we try to avoid big rulemaking and policy initiatives during legislative session, but here we are. As some of you may be aware, there's a bill that would essentially allow local government to make the REACH code mandatory within their jurisdictions. The REACH code proposal we're bringing you today is based on the laws we have in place today. So if a bill were to pass that would change what the REACH code is or how it's adopted or how it applies, we would come back to you, nullify this REACH code and start over under whatever that new construct would be. Because the REACH code is an optional code path, it doesn't have all the trappings of our other codes. So for this cycle, we decided to follow some of the usual processes for code adoption, but in a compressed time frame so that we could try to line up our code adoption dates. We opened up a request for proposals for the residential REACH code in December. We then held public meetings to discuss the proposals. We worked with the proponents and we brought drafts to you based on all those discussions. The proposal includes 2 energy efficiency paths, 1 performance and 1 prescriptive, and then also a solar ready path and an EV ready or electric vehicle ready path. Unlike other codes, the REACH code only requires consultation with the appropriate advisory board. But because of the complexity and importance of everything going on, we wanted to ask you for a formal recommendation on what to do in terms of the content and the timing of the REACH code. So that's why we're here today. Our goal through this process has been to have a residential REACH code in place by April 1, consistent with our other codes. With that, I'm happy to answer any of your kind of threshold questions, or I can turn it over to Mark Heizer to walk through the REACH code proposal.
Through the chair, this is John Camiller.
Welcome.
Yes, I'd like to ask, you mentioned that if the legislation changes the ability with regard to cities and I assume counties to be able to adopt the REACH code as their required base code. And then you said that you would bring it back to us to review the REACH code. I'm not sure that I understand what you mean there. And I'd like you to kind of tell us what that means. So if all of a sudden, if a city can adopt the REACH code, are we going to be able to come back and change the REACH code that they can adopt? I don't understand it.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Camiller, through the chair. Yeah, we know that we didn't develop this REACH code in mind when we started out in December with the idea that anyone would be able to make it mandatory. It was intended to be an optional above code path. So if a bill passes, then that changes what the REACH code is or how it applies, then we would nullify this REACH code and start over, is what I have in mind. So then we would develop a REACH code with that in mind, based on whatever that statute were to say as to process, as to contents, and knowing that its intended purpose would be to allow local government to make it mandatory. I don't think it makes sense that a REACH code we developed under the laws we have today would be used for another purpose. So we would just come back and start over if there's a law change on the REACH code.
So just to clarify, just expand a little bit and clarify, we would at that time possibly be developing a new reachier REACH code?
I don't know if it would be reachier or less reachy, Chair Hansen, or the same level of reach. But it would be based on whatever the law is. I think, it's a different matter. An optional above code path and a mandatory code are two different things. And so, the details and the concerns around how efficient is it, what exactly does it cost, those things are different in the context of a mandatory code than they are in the context of an optional above code path. So we'd see whatever the statute says and we'd come back and dig in and do that work. But we would not intend that we would use this REACH code that we're talking about today for a different purpose that we didn't anticipate. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. I'm a little, so if a city or a county adopted the current REACH code as their baseline code, then, or adopted it into and melded it with the current baseline code and made it all encompassing, we would develop another possibly reachier code. And then when we go around for the next code adoption, are we going to have two codes that we have to review and adopt? We're going to have the reachier code, the REACH code that's out there that some cities and counties have adopted, plus the regular baseline code. Are we working on two codes now in the state of Oregon as I look into the future? Can you comment on that?
It depends what happens at the legislature. But in general, as it is today, we need to be developing a commercial code and a commercial REACH code, a residential code and a residential REACH code. That's as the statute stands today. But right now, that residential and commercial REACH code is optional. No one can make it mandatory without applying for a local amendment, going through extra process. If the legislature changes our REACH code statute, which is what they're proposing to do, which is what they're discussing right now, then we would have a new statutory construct for the REACH code. and then we would figure out what that looks like going forward. So I think we plan going forward, and that's one of the things I want to talk about this summer is kind of what makes the most sense for reach code development going forward based on whatever the laws are, whether they're the laws today where it's an optional above code path, or if the legislature changes the laws and allows local government to make it mandatory, then we would be doing that code development work. It's just what the reach code is will depend on what the legislature does. Does that make sense?
Not really. I mean, yes, it does, but does it make sense? No. But
through the chair, this is John Camiller. I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate what you're saying, but I think politically, how in the world can anybody at BCD, after the legislature has changed the rule to allow the reach code to be adopted, who at BCD is going to stand up and say, wait a second, this reach code is way too restrictive and costs too much, and we don't know enough about it, so we're gonna shave off a lot of this. I don't buy that would happen. I think politically, I don't know anybody at BCD who would survive saying that.
Mr. Camiller, through the chair, I think the intention wouldn't be to go in and tear up the reach code based on whatever, it being too costly or whatever else. It would be, we developed that reach code based on a set of laws that were in place at the time that made the reach code a certain thing, an optional above code path. If they change what the reach code is, I think we have to change how we develop the reach code and what we ask the board to consider when you're looking at the reach code. So I'm comfortable, making that, bringing something back to you based on that premise, not based on the content and whether it's a good idea or whatever, but part of the bill has to do with allowing local government to make it mandatory. Part of it has to do with setting very specific benchmarks of how efficient it should be relative to the base code. We didn't do that this time because that bill hasn't been passed and that's not the law we have today. So we're going to have to come back if the law changes and figure out what that looks like going forward. I don't think it's a matter of, coming back with the intent of making it cheaper or more or less efficient. It's just under the legal construct. If the legal construct changes, we'll need to do that. If a bill doesn't pass, then we're complying with the EO, we're complying with the statutes as they stand today. We're developing an above code path. But if the statutes change, I think it makes perfect sense. I'm very comfortable saying, okay, now the reach code is a different thing than it was when we were developing the last reach code. So we need to figure out how to comply with that statutory change.
And change the last reach code or going forward on the next reach code? Because part of the challenge with the reach code is we haven't put enough analysis into it to know what its real impact on the industry is going to be. And which is one of the reasons why we put it out there and let people use it to see what works and what doesn't. And so to make it mandatory in a location without a process, to make it mandatory in a political sense through a political process rather than a technical process would seem, it would just seem to make it, for at least that period of time, that 3-year period where we're doing things as a code that wasn't really analyzed the way we analyze the code. I'm sorry if that sounds inarticulate, but that's my concern.
I hear that, Mr. Camiller, through the chair, and that's the pickle we're in. That's why we wanted to talk to you today, because, and that's why we try not to do this kind of stuff in the middle of legislative session, because it's a little challenging considering where we are and where we might be in a couple months. And so, we have options. Right now, the reach code, all the process it requires is that the division consults with the appropriate advisory boards, and then that we post it on our website with a new effective date. There's no rulemaking or anything. So in that same way, that's what the rule says. And so that means we have the power to remove it from the website and say, we're developing a reach code based on the new law. But, that's what we wanted to talk to you about, because we want something that works for everyone that you feel comfortable with. So, having a reach code in place by April 1 was our goal, that we came up with that goal consistent with our codes before legislative session started. If that doesn't make sense anymore, then that's some of the feedback we want to hear from you today. Does it make sense to take the work we've done so far and go forward with that, or does it make sense to wait and see what the legislature does? We want to hear from you on that question as well.
Through the chair, this is Travis Argue. I prefer that we would wait to see what the legislature is doing. And, I think that's a sensible approach. If we don't mandatorily have to adopt this by April 1, if we just have to work and act on it, I think that's the most sensible thing we could do.
Through the chair, this is Emily Kemper. I was basically going to say the same thing. If we have an option to recommend that we wait to see what the legislature is going to do, I would be in favor of that.
Yeah.
Through the chair, if I may, I'll just share a couple of comments to clarify my understanding, and I'll just start with saying I support waiting as well, just to help avoid confusion with industry of what specification we're trying to go for. But my understanding is right now the REACH code, just as a voluntary standard, doesn't specify a performance target, and that the goal has been to try to use that as the roadmap for where we're heading with the executive order to get to the zero standards. So I think we all recognize that we're going to see a big code improvement in 2023, and we have a good roadmap now. The language under the House Bill 2398 does specify a performance target. I believe it's 10% better than code. So it would actually be maybe not as efficient as the proposal on the table now. So anyways, the question I have is the process with 2398, how, if it passed, what timeline would we be looking at for having new language for ORS 455 for the REACH code language, upon which we would then modify the REACH code? So if the legislative session is like 3 months, then does it go to, and at what point would we end up with the final language that would guide the work?
Through the chair, it's a good question. Eli, I don't know exactly, to be honest, what the effective date is. I think it's 90 days after sine die, as it is drafted right now. I think maybe some of the bill proponents are on here. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe it's 90 days after sine die, but we'd have to figure out what that looks like, because it also may address timing, so if it were to say that you adopt a REACH code simultaneously with the underlying code, then I would presume we would do that as we work on these next code additions. And that's one of the concepts that's been discussed, so that cities, if the bill were to pass, so that you're not coming on and off a REACH code path, that the REACH code would be adopted at the same time as the underlying code. If that were the case, then I would presume that we would work on REACH code adoption at the same time as residential code adoption, and we'd be looking at October 1, 2023 for residential REACH code. So it kind of depends, I think, both on when the bill goes into effect, which I think is 90 days after sine die, I'm not positive, but then also on what's in there in terms of process.
Okay. Do we have any other questions for Alana? I have one final question, but I'm going to let anybody else jump in if they have anything, and I'm not seeing any hands, and my Zoom screen is so jammed with people. I apologize. It's very daunting. Anyway. Okay, so I see none. Alana, I would like to know if you can comment on 2398 in its language, and I am not I've read it, but I'm not really, I don't feel I completely understand it, but does the statute stipulate the process that a local government would go through to accept the REACH code as their standard? Is there any guidance to local government contained within it on the process that they need to take in order to do? Will they have their own little building code, or will they have their own consulting, or do they just say, yeah, we want to do that and vote on it?
Chair Hansen, I believe that a city would do it by ordinance. So, you know, as it is today, someone can apply for a local amendment that's different than the statewide building code. That requires a bunch of process in order to do that they hold basically their own kind of mini code adoption within their jurisdiction and have stakeholder meetings and cost findings and all that kind of stuff. This bill would say, notwithstanding the statewide building code, notwithstanding that local adoption process, local government can make the REACH code that we would develop with you all mandatory within their jurisdictions by ordinance. I think that's how it's intended to work, that we would do the process side at the state for the REACH code, and then the local government would adopt it by ordinance.
Intended to work.
I believe so.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, Mark. Get your notes ready, because Mark Heizer now has something to say.
Thank you, Chair Hansen, and also Acting Chair Tamarowit. So at this point, it's to give a little further background on the development and then to walk through essentially sort of a consensus document we've come up with through multiple meetings. As noted, we put out a request for proposals. We received multiple, two that sort of formed sort of a baseline for our prescriptive, came from both Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance and the Zero Coalition. We held public meetings on January 13th, 25th, and 26th to start getting feedback on what would really go into this document. The intent was to have the REACH code itself is really an overlay that for the residential REACH code would really substitute Chapter 11, plus there in the final piece, there's also a minor modification to section, a mechanical ventilation section. So through these, we also had, through all the feedback that we received, we reached out to some of the proponents to try and get additional clarification, had some sub-meetings that went well. We had feedback on draft comments, and the resulting of all the public feedback working through is before you today, the revised code, which would really be an overlay or a substitution for the current Chapter 11, would do some of the major modifications that I'm about to go through right now. The first one is that instead of one additional measure, there would be a requirement for 3 additional measures. This, again, and also this would apply to new buildings, new constructions, new construction, not to renovations or alterations. As we go through this, so first one is 3 additional measures versus our current requirement for 1. Again, remembering that in our 2021 code, we took what had been additional measure 5 and really made that measure mandatory. So we still had, so it had a significant improvement on measures during the 2021 adoption. But above the 2021 code, we would move from 3 measures to 1. The second piece of major items is changing the prescriptive baseline wall to a U factor of from 0.59 to 0.57. And that under the prescriptive path would be R23 advanced framing. And that would mean moving from 16-inch on center studs to 24-inch studs on center. And through the public process, an equivalent is also if people are using 4-inch nominal 2x4s, they can do R13 insulation with an R6 continuous insulation layer. Also, there was an addition of requiring setting a maximum solar heat gain coefficient for windows at 0.40 for solar heat gain coefficient. One piece that the division did modify for the use of sort of setting advanced framing is mandatory. Under the structural portions, you cannot do any prescriptive construction seismically with 24-inch center framing. The first floor has to be, on a 3-story structure, has to be 16-inch on center. So we have some language for buildings that are more than 2 stories above grade to give them a path to be able to do prescriptive construction structural paths. On the first floor only, it's still R23 advanced framing, 24-inch spacing for the upper levels. Moving on to the actual measures table. One of the first things that was done was getting rid of the problematic glazing area measure was deleted from the measures table. A few equipment efficiency standards were massaged to align with more recent standards. Primarily was the electric heat pump water heater and a request to have clarify that a drain water heat recovery unit is a vertical unit. In addition, there was the division found that if you wanted to do a different insulation path, there are currently in our table 2 insulation upgrades. We added using a overall performance of 8% better than code. There was an addition of you could get 2 credits if you went to 18% better above code. The last change to the additional measures table was that the air leakage for buildings is still set at 3 air changes per hour at 50 pascals. But the additional requirement is that a heat recovery ventilator be used for the whole house ventilation system. So this, and it clarified the level of efficiency for the heat recovery ventilators based on some input we had from the ventilation industry on getting a better standard in for whole house ventilation. So 3 measures from that table are required. The next 2 big pieces are that home testing is, blower door testing is mandatory for all homes. So every home would require a blower door test, and also all ductwork would need to be tested with a duct blaster test. So, and they're level set for maximum duct leakage under those. Next piece is the mechanical ventilation portion. Want to mention that for the whole house ventilation in section N, excuse me, got to get to the right section. Under section, new section M1101.1, it would make it, there's a request that when you're doing a whole house ventilation system, the central furnace cannot be interlocked as the as part of the whole house ventilation. So the whole house ventilation system does need to be independent of the furnace fan. One last piece that we wanted to mention that's before getting on to my next solar ready and EV ready is that there is an allowance, just like under the original REACH code, to use the latest green plumbing code. It is now known as the We Stand code that is available. So there are some pieces in that that would be available for use. It's not mandating any of the portions, but for it does allow the use of more water conserving fixtures that aren't under the current green plumbing code. So it provides additional guidance for that. So it's bringing that in for use in high efficiency structures. Moving on to solar ready, we took the proposal from the Zero Coalition did a little bit of a change to also clean up. What they had brought in was most of the language from the International Residential Codes Solar Ready Appendix. They had done some modifications to it. We did a little bit more to make sure that the language about townhomes was clear. It has, and that was brought in with some clarifications on shading and some additional work with our electrical contractors to provide some alternate methods and better language on how to get flexible, to be able to use flexible raceway to get the solar, the pre-installed solar pathway installed. On electrical vehicles, this is all new. This has been brought in, again, the Zero Coalition language with some minor modifications. One thing that is in here is to note that, yes, the installation methodology for these is per the electrical code. It discusses the electrical pathway and a minimum capacity for at least a 50 amp breaker in the panel under the EV Ready. So that gets us through the prescriptive portions of what is different from the current 2021 Oregon Residential Specialty Code. There had been one proposal about performance paths. We looked at that, and what we have done in the proposal before you today is that the proponents for the changes to the REACH code, we have, under the prescriptive path that we've just gone through, developed that to show somewhere between a 10 and 15% improvement in efficiency. And they were hoping, or the intent was to meet or exceed the requirements of the Zero Energy Ready Home program that, of course, we're all under Executive Order 17-20 to meet by next year, or in the, excuse me, the 2023 code. So they put those forward saying, and we feel that the prescriptive path that has been put forward pretty much aligns with that. So what we looked at were in the International Residential Code, International Energy Conservation Code, it has a performance path called the ERA path. We looked at, did some investigation of what would be an equivalent. So what would be the minimum score you would need under an ERI path to meet what is in the prescriptive path. So creating a minimum score that would align with what is in the prescriptive performance. And what we looked at for that was to see, first off, where our current code is coming out. This uses essentially a HERS performance using REM rate to get to a score. We looked at the current code REM rate and took a 15% reduction from that. We came up with one ERI number using that check. We looked at the 2018 IECC, the 2018 IRC. We reduced their required ERI by 15%, came out with a fairly similar number. And we also, with Oregon Department of Energy, we asked, the other reason for looking at ERI is that HERS ratings under the model National Zero Energy Ready Home Program, they do have people perform a HERS rating on the home. And we checked with the US DOE ZERH program, and they said that between somewhere in 52 and 55 would be the score that would be expected for a zero energy ready home. So the levels that we set in the performance path using the ERI, sort of getting people used to the ERI performance path, is 53 for climate zone 4C and 52 for 5B. It aligns. We asked the proponents to, at public meetings, to see if they had any issues with it. Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance came back and said that that would work. Also, again, we're seeing that it would be really where the ERI that you would need to meet the EO 17-20 under the performance path. Again, it's a little bit lower than probably most of the calculations that we have seen to meet those targets. Again, so this is what the code looks like. There were multiple meetings that we had. We asked for continued feedback. I really want to thank all of the proponents who took part in this and all the public stakeholders who participated in calls, who gave feedback, Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, the Zero Coalition, Northwest Natural Gas, the Responsible Energy Codes Alliance, lots of solar stakeholders, some builders and other people who participated in the calls. As part of this, in your packet, you might available, we did a quick look at possibly what the added costs would be for this. We have that available for review. There was a report from, we've heard public testimony at actually the legislature, and also from the proponents of some of the proposals here gave feedback on their estimated costs for this. So we have that available for your review. There was, of course, fairly limited time to go through all this, but it is available. With that, I'll be able to take questions and comments before turning it back over to the chair if there are questions for the division. And also, once it's turned back to the chair, there will be time for a lot of public stakeholders who are on today to wish to give testimony, and will be available for comments then too. Thank you, chairs.
Through the chair.
You're on mute, Mr. Chair.
Mark, there's a number of things in this code that are electrical related. And I know you've had some input and I've seen some of it, but would like to have those type of things maybe compiled to where they can be included in the electrical section as the addendum to the electrical code, or at least as a note, so that when we as contractors go out on these projects, we may not know that it's a REACH code, and a lot of times we're supplying the exhaust fans. And if we have to use the energy recovery exhaust fan, that's a big cost difference, plus installation difference. And just was kind of asking if we could get that, at least some of these things put together. I know that I've run into things like, such as having the exhaust fan in a laundry room. And if we have to go to from a $100 fan to a $400 fan, if that's something that can be divided out, that's a fan I don't know that's ever been turned on, but it's mandatory that we have them in there. We also have things like smoke detectors and CO2 detectors that aren't in the electrical code, but we're required to wire them in. So that would be my comment.
I would add to that, and I appreciate that comment very much, but I would add to that how the code is usable is very, very important. If it can be, it's confusing enough as it is to bounce from one to another to get an answer. If that path, those paths that we have to take are very clearly noted. And if anybody has anything like this, anybody in industry that has to interact with this code on a daily basis has anything to bring up in this regard, please do right now. Mark, thank you very much. That was a lot of information and well presented. So just to summarize, everything that you just talked about and that we have in front of us is the new REACH code that we have in front of us right now. Those are the methodologies and the changes that were made for this new REACH code.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Yes, through the chair, these would be so taking Chapter 11 of the current residential specialty code, this would be above and beyond, essentially substituting Chapter 11 with this information. So if for those who choose to pick the REACH code, building above code, this is under the statute required to be accept things that we might have in this REACH code that might not be in the normal code. anyone can build to this. So such as some of the green code pieces, they're allowed to build to those things. So this is, yes, if you want to say you built to the REACH code, these are the pieces, as you'll note in the document that's available, sort of the red strike through and the blue bold. Those are the revisions to the current Chapter 11. So this would substitute the provisions of that, if you are doing the REACH code. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions for Mark?
Yes, through the chair. I'm sorry. This is John Camiller.
John.
How does our Oregon current code compare to other states? The base code. I mean, where are we in the pecking order with other states relative to energy efficiency?
So through the chair, Mark Heizer with the division, based on analysis that's done, we really rely on seeing what's coming out from the U.S. Department of Energy. They do a national comparison map that they try and keep updated of where Oregon is. And of course, there's a new 2021 model code that just came out for residential. We don't know we don't keep track of who's adopted yet. But if looking at states in our region, say in the Pacific Northwest, we're pretty much on par with Washington. This would, of our current code, probably in alignment with anyone who has the 2018 IECC as their code, which could include Montana and Idaho. Washington, of course, has their own home developed, so we haven't done a face-to-face analysis on their current one, and they've been through some challenges of getting theirs adopted. I believe we haven't done an in-depth analysis across the water, across Columbia, but probably fairly close to them. I believe they're making a big jump. California's code has some mandates for solar in it, which sort of make it hard to do a full-on comparison, but we have in the past done a comparison of what sort of the prescriptive envelope and the like are, and we're very close to California. They're ahead in a few pieces. We're ahead on a few pieces of the baseline code in a climate zone. So we're fairly close to all of the West Coast regional codes, ahead in some areas and not ahead in some others. So, but on par with the others.
Okay. Right now, our base code is ASHRAE 90.1 2019, right?
That is for commercial.
Right.
And yes. And that one is, well, in October 1, that will be our, mandatory statewide, and that will be the first in the nation adopting that. So we'll be well ahead on the commercial side.
Right. Any other questions?
Through the chair, this is Eli Volum. More just a comment. I'd just like to say I'm really impressed with the process and with the end result from the request for all the proposals, all the public discussion and meetings, and this end result. I think we should all just recognize that we're looking at the future. I mean, the executive order is requiring the zero energy ready performance by 2023, and I think we're looking at it. So regardless of what we decide on now, I think it's important for us to realize this is where we're heading. So I think we want to think about how we can best take industry there through this REACH code process that we're going to be looking at based on the outcome of the House bill. Some of the comments or some of the things that were provided, I think they'll come out in the public comments, are the basis for how these proposals came together. So specifically from NEEA and Zero Coalition, they took utility program data, they took research of performance out there, they took cost data from their program stuff. And so I think there's a pretty good basis there. I wish there was more builder involvement in the process. And frankly, I wish there was more jurisdiction, city involvement in the process too, so that they would have a better sense of what they're asking for or what, they're trying to get. But at the end of the day, I think really just be clear with ourselves that we're heading this direction. just back to my earlier comment, I still support waiting. I think that's probably the best thing we can do for folks to avoid confusion and having multiple versions of the REACH code. I think it probably makes sense for us to see what happens with the House bill. And I think we should also, in that same vein, think about what it means if it doesn't pass and what jurisdictions might try to do in that case. So just a little food for thought. So anyways, I just want to say good work to Building Codes Division. Thank you to everybody that submitted comments. I think it was a great public process, and I think we're looking at a pretty good representation of what we're going to see in a couple of years.
Any other comments?
Yeah, through the chair, this is John Camiller again. What percentage increase over is the REACH code, the proposed REACH code over the last one? You know, in terms of efficiency, whether it's in a numeric score or percentage increase in energy savings. I'm just...
How much better are we doing with this REACH?
Yeah, that's
saying, John.
There you go. Cliff Notes version, right?
Through the chair, Mark Heizer with the division and board member Miller. The first residential REACH code was not a very well developed one, and we don't have numbers back to that because it really goes back to code cycles. We look at the REACH code as an overlay relative to the current code. So relative to the 2021 code, it's from division. See, it probably is in a, depending on which path you're picking, probably somewhere between 10 and 18%. So averaging out, I would say probably in the 15% range for an improvement over the current residential code. But we want to do a full analysis on that of what comes out of the final work here today, but of a general range, and based on the information from the proponents and the energy modeling they had done beforehand, they were showing somewhere between 10 and 15. So that relative to the current code, it's about a 10 to maybe even higher performance improvement, just depending on, you know, what your HVAC system is and which of the 8 additional measures you pick, which 3 of those you pick, excuse me. So it's a range, but that's the general answer.
Okay. Through the chair again, I have a couple more questions. If we're going to essentially table this, and that would be my suggestion, and I heard support from others on the committee, I really think that in order for us to make a good evaluation of the REACH code, especially if things are, if the legislature changed the rules and how it can be adopted individually around the state, I think we need more information on what the cost impacts are. I appreciate that the division sent out this, some information of the cost and you know, time of cost recovery this morning. I haven't had much chance to really think about it or look at it, but I really think we need to have some basic information on what the typical building is, what the costs are on that typical building of the base code we're just adopting, and what the cost would be on this proposed REACH code. You know, we might as well get the information investigation started, because the legislature, if they change it, we're going to have to know that stuff before I would be comfortable approving it. So that would be really useful, and it's a suggestion that I'd just like to see some answers on that in terms of what are the costs and what are the payback based on energy savings. And anyway,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, John, I would second that. The thing that stands out to me is modeling. What are we modeling off of? What is the structure that we're establishing these additional costs from, or these additional savings, potential savings from? There's a lot that can go into that, and it's a Herculean effort that has led to this point, and well done in that regard. But I think we do need to know a little bit more about our baseline that we're using to come up with these numbers. Would make me feel more comfortable. Any other questions here for Mark?
Well, this is John Camillo again. Through the chair, I'd like to make one comment. And the nature of my comment is, you know, this forum that we're in talks about building codes and building safety and energy efficiency, but all of us on the panel are also in other forums where we sit. And, you know, I'm a residential and multi-family builder and build commercial buildings as well. And when we go to a planning commission or a city council, there's always discussion of what are you doing about affordable housing?
Yeah.
Okay. And so everything we're doing here affects the cost of the affordable housing. And, you know, just looking at some of these costs that are added on here on this information sheet, you know, we have to make a decision that weighs the value of those costs to all of our citizens, to all of the politicians who ask good questions about affordable housing, against the energy efficiency and what that means to our society in general. So I just think it's very important that we have good cost information and that we all understand how that information was developed and what it really means, and that we get it in time that we can maybe talk to our subs and assure ourselves that the cost information there that's generally provided by industry groups or interest groups, that it's accurate and that your HVAC sub can actually do it for that kind of a price. And thank you. I just wanted to say that's the nature of my interest in this. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Chair, if I may, Mr. Camillo, I think these are really important points that we've been thinking a lot about as we think through lessons learned from the last couple code adoption cycles. And these are some of the issues I really want to tackle as we work on kind of clarifying our code adoption process, because I think one of the lessons learned for me is that a lot of the times when we start talking about cost and when we start talking about how big an improvement it is, it's too late in the process to get good information that we've all agreed upon to make decisions. And so making that part of the code development process throughout the process, I think, is going to be important as these things are becoming more complex. And as we have these different gates along the way towards code adoption, that by the time we get to the board, it's too late. We should have been talking about that earlier in the process. How big an improvement is it exactly? How much is it going to cost exactly? So that there is that time to refine that information by the time we get to the decision point. So it's something we've been thinking a lot about, and I appreciate the feedback on it.
Well, I might say, unfortunately, at this point in time, we are in that position where we are behind the curve. Okay. Any other comments? Any other questions? No? All right. So I believe at this point, we need to open this up to Keith Anderson. Keith, do you have something to comment on in regards to this? I see that Keith has got a presentation. Is that correct, Debbie?
No, Mr. Chair, he was just available for discussion in case there was some electrical questions.
Okay. Since he's available, he sat through all this to this point. Does anybody have a question for Keith? Okay, seeing none, let's we move on to some oral testimony. Is that correct, Debbie?
Yes, sir. Our policy analyst will take care of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy Boulton, Policy Analyst at the Division. We've received both written comments and requests for oral testimony. The written comments are posted to the website. And we have the following individuals here for oral testimony. We have Tonia Sorrell-Neal from International Masonry Institute, Kevin Duell from Northwest Natural, Angela Crowley-Koch from Oregon Solar Storage Industries Association, Zach Snyder from Solar Oregon, David Heslam from the Zero Coalition, and Shilpa Surana from Northwest Energy Efficiency Association. Thank you.
Excellent. How much time do we have for each oral testimony?
It's ultimately at the pleasure of the chair, but 5 minutes is standard.
And that seems reasonable, as we're an hour into this as it is already, and we've got, okay. Tonia, are you available right now?
I am, thank you.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Hansen and council members. I am Tonia Sorrell-Neal, West Region Director of the International Masonry Institute. The Oregon masonry industry has a strong history of durable products, well-paying jobs, and expert crafts, women and men who are proud of the buildings we build, the communities we protect, and the environment we cherish. We are constantly improving our products, processes, and technology to serve these goals. Today, I come before you representing union bricklayers, small and medium-sized contractors, and manufacturers with businesses who manufacture and supply and install concrete masonry units. I am asking you, as you move forward, to consider our industry when you are updating the energy provisions for the Oregon Structural Specialty Code. We do not believe that it's the council's intention to negatively impact our industry, but is rather a possible unintended consequence of the updates in transition. I know you will be looking at several options, and we hope to work with you as you move forward. Our concern is different options that you are considering will provide the opportunity for our industry to be left behind and will have critical financial and economic impact to the more than 5,000 men and women who our industry represents. In quick sum, over the past several years, this council thoroughly discussed, considered, and passed an amendment that allowed the state to benefit from the natural thermal elements a CMU mass wall has to hold and release energy. The council recognized that some building types, for example, school gymnasiums, Costco's, and Les Schwab's, by their use have different insulation and energy benefits and need, and that requiring additional insulation actually works against the mechanical system, expending more energy and costing more money to the owner. These building types keep my bricklayers, manufacturers, and contractors employed on an annual basis. It is the primary source of our business volume, and the loss of the mass wall exemption in Oregon would damage my members' financial and economic opportunities severely, and will result in the reduction of job loss. We will quite honestly not have the market to continue the level of employment without this segment of construction. Regarding the non-residential code, we can support adoption of 90.1 2019 with some amendments, including the mass wall amendment that this council previously put in place. 90.1 2019 in its purest form doesn't reflect our Oregon climate and relies on older national average cost data for mass walls that are not reflective of Oregon's costs. If you all adopt 90.1 2019 without amendments, this part of our industry will be left behind as it becomes too costly or exceedingly more difficult to build exposed concrete block. We can also support SAM, the 2021 version of the IECC, keeping the state-specific amendments. This is really our first choice. And it's worth noting that the option to use ComCheck is helpful, but it is limited in the ability to accurately evaluate the thermal performance of concrete masonry mass walls, so it doesn't really help to fully maintain the market share for these manufacturers and craft people. The CMU amendment in the current alternate method is limited in scope and doesn't impact many buildings on a statewide basis, and yet is very important to the health of the masonry industry. If we had the opportunity to be in person, as we have in the past, I would be able to show you the impact more thoroughly to our industry. The mass wall has many positive benefits to the built environment while not driving up additional unnecessary costs to the construction of the building. Without the code amendment, the additional cost for the CMU wall mass wall will run the risk of pricing it out of the market. We know the impact to be very significant to our small business owners and employees if this design opportunity is no longer feasible. I am asking you to work with the masonry industry as you have so many times in the past to maintain the Massawa Code Amendment that will continue to allow us to be part of the economy in Oregon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Tonia. Is it appropriate to offer any questions to Tonia for a couple minutes here?
Yes, sir, that's fine.
Are there any questions for Tonia? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to Kevin Duell. Kevin, are you available? All right, Kevin.
I have a quick process question, Jay, on Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Would we be discussing this after all the presentations? Are we going to consider the suggestion for an amendment to the commercial code? I'm unclear on what that process will be today.
After we review or after we listen to the oral testimony that's up, we will have the option for a motion to proceed with adoption, tabling, not liking. We'll have a motion process.
Through the chair, if I may, Mr. Heikkinen, I believe that last testimony was more related to the action that the CIEB took at their previous meeting relative to approving ASHRAE 90.1 2019. And that is in the rulemaking process right now. And I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Tonia, that we got rulemaking comments through that process similar to what you provided today for the board. So, and again, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe this is about ASHRAE 90.1 2019 adoption, not about the residential reach code. And you provided comments for rulemaking as well.
I haven't provided any comments for rulemaking, but I will tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
And again, through the chair, how will their comments or recommendations be considered? Will it be brought back to this board, or will it only be considered by the division?
Thank you, Mr. Heikkinen. I guess I would like to hear from you. If you would like to talk about it at a future CIEB meeting, we could put it on the agenda. As it is now, we are on a path towards adopting 90.1 2019 April 1, but we still have that 6 months of phase-in period. So if we need to make some adjustments or consider alternate methods or a statewide alternate method, we could put that on the agenda for the next CIEB meeting.
Fair enough. That answers my question. Thanks, Alana.
Thank you, Alana. Kevin Duell.
Thank you, Chair Hansen, and to both chairs and boards in the division. For the record, this is Kevin Duell with Northwest Natural. First of all, I wanted to commend everyone on all the time and energy spent getting the REACH code to where it is today. It's been quite a process. We've submitted written testimony, and I just wanted to highlight some pieces of that in the interest of time. In particular, there's an additional measures table, and I'd like to address additional measure 2, high efficiency water heating system, and ask that if a heat pump water heater is installed within the thermal envelope, that it should be ducted to the outside to prevent taxing the HVAC system for its heat supply. There are a couple of studies that I've seen, and I'm sure there are more, that have identified that there is a clear connection between a heat pump water heater in the conditioned space and an increase of energy used by the heating system. I imagine that requiring this in the REACH code, since it's aspirational, would merely alter design to eliminate heat pump water heaters in the thermal envelope, where they have to be outside that thermal envelope, and therefore would have a zero cost impact. But it would improve the performance of the building, and since the REACH code is all about advancing energy efficiency, I would be ironic to have this in there still. I'd also like to see there are additional measures 1 and 2, which are high efficiency HVAC system and high efficiency water heating system. We'd prefer to see at least one of those be required it would be sad to see the whole envelope advance and have the mechanical systems stay behind. For example, with the water heating, just as an example, you can have the best envelope on the planet, but the occupants are still going to use hot water as much as they would otherwise. And if that system isn't a higher efficiency system, it will consume as much energy as a regular non-aspirational building. So that's it in a nutshell. Appreciate the opportunity to testify. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Kevin? Thank you, Kevin. And I apologize for butchering your name.
Hey, no problem.
Angela. Okay. Angela Crowley-Koch. Angela Crowley-Koch.
It's actually Angela Crowley-Koch. We're close enough.
Yeah,
Thank
my best.
Thank you. I'm the Executive Director of OSSIA, the Oregon Solar Plus Storage Industries Association. Thank you for hearing my testimony today. So I'm testifying, and before I forget, earlier it was mentioned that Zach Snyder is going to testify. He wasn't able to make it today. But my testimony represents both organizations. Zach is from Solar Oregon, and we together submitted joint testimony in support of the REACH code, in particular of the solar ready provisions. We worked very hard with DCD and with other stakeholders to come up with solar ready provisions for the REACH code that are practical and that have common sense exceptions for homes where it doesn't make sense to build solar ready. And really there are huge benefits to homeowners. The cost of making homes solar ready on the front end is much cheaper than having to deal with a home trying to install solar on a home that is not solar ready. Can be up into the thousands if it's a really tricky project. So we appreciate the committee considering this, and we believe that this version of the Solar Ready Code truly fulfills the governor's executive order to have all new homes in Oregon be solar ready. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for Angela? Okay, seeing none, we move on to David Heslam.
Thank you, Chair Hansen, and members of both committees today. I'm here speaking today on behalf of the Zero Coalition. That's the Zero Energy Ready Oregon Coalition. And it's a group that's comprised of nonprofits, builders, architects, engineers, city governments, and individual Oregonians as well. And our members have been involved in code development in Oregon for many years, but came together in 2017 to try and help speak at these type of forums with more of a common voice and bring people's opinions together beforehand. For this REACH code proposal process, we actually have a technical committee at the coalition, and the technical committee put this proposal together over a 6-week period, and that committee was made up a pretty diverse group of builders, architects, green building consultants, and others. And we did lean on research from the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, NEEA, for the savings analysis and also for resourcing some of the cost information. But I just wanted to share, we have written testimony as well that was supplied that goes into detail on the cost estimates that we used. I just wanted to share what the principles were that that we set about with in order to create a proposal here. And first it was for usability. The current statutes already say that anywhere in the state, if somebody voluntarily wants to use the REACH code, the local jurisdiction has to allow them to use the REACH code. And in prior versions, sometimes the REACH code wasn't very usable. So we really wanted to make sure it was usable. And in that case, made the proposal a system of edits to the draft 2021 Oregon Residential Specialty Code rather than just throwing a bunch of standards in there. So usability was big. alignment with the governor's goals in terms of Executive Order 1720 primarily, but also trying to be on track for Executive Order 2004 was key. So we tried to make this a roadmap for what the 2023 ORSC could look like in terms of energy efficiency goals, the PV ready and the EV ready components. Another principle was that we wanted to use proven measures. So we really culled from what we saw from a database from the Energy Trust of Oregon of thousands and thousands, it's over 10,000 homes, and what measures they've been using over the past years in order to attain higher levels of savings, and really pulled from those in order to put together what we thought were good groups of measures for this proposal. And then the basis behind our proposal really is, and something that Mr. Camiller mentioned, is they're designed to provide overall lower societal costs and lower total cost of home ownership for individuals. So that's sort of a fundamental principle for putting a proposal together. And then lastly, I would just say that the proposal is building from sort of two baselines. On the energy modeling side, it's coming from sort of the consensus baseline that Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, Oregon Department of Energy, and the division put together last year in terms of what is the 2006 Energy Code. That formed the baseline of the Executive Order 2004 goals. And so everything builds off of that. But once you have that baseline in place for modeling, gives you know where you're starting from. And then the cost baseline that we used was the draft 2021 ORSC, and that everything was just an incremental cost from there. So those are the key points I just wanted to share with you. The rest is in written testimony. And like I said, the basis of any cost information that we utilized is all referenced in that document. Thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the public process that was run for this REACH code proposal.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. And thank you for the written information also. Any questions for David? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to, I'm going to try, Shilpa Surana. Am I close?
Thank you. You pronounced my name absolutely right. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. All right. We have 10:53. Have at it.
Thank you. So this is Shilpa here, and I work for Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. I participated in the technical committee David Heslam was just referring about to help coordinate the proposal which NEEA submitted as a draft for BCD's consideration to make sure that our proposals, NEEA's proposal was closely aligned with Zero Coalition's proposal. So there was definitely a teamwork involved here. NEEA also appreciates BCD accepting most of the recommendations which were made and incorporating them in this draft, which is being considered today. I do want to talk about the analysis backing behind this proposal. NEEA has been coordinating with ODO and BCD to help, facilitate discussions and come up to establish baselines for 2006 code as well as 2017 code. We use NEEA supports code development in the Northwest region, and we do code development work in Washington State as well. And I do want to point out that the same methodology has been used as what we would do to support the Washington residential code work as well. So this method is sound, and the energy analysis which we have presented in the CAST workbook is sound. NEEA had published 2 studies, one in March of 2020 last year in support of the Executive Order 17-20, and we also published a study in February of 2021 I would, these are all identified in our written testimony. I would recommend the board members and the interested staff to look at the studies to understand the method and the modeling behind, and I'm available to answer any questions which arise from that. So in a nutshell, NEEA's analysis shows that the proposed 2021 Oregon residential code shows 1% to 7.5% savings over the 2017 code. What
was that number again? I'm sorry.
So the 1%, anything between 1 to 7.5% savings over the 2017 code. And that depends on the options you choose from the additional measures table. Using that as a baseline, our analysis shows that in order to achieve equivalency to DOE zero energy specification, we need 19% regulated energy savings over the 2017 code. And we believe the REACH code, which is being deliberated today, will be close enough to meet this target and set the upcoming 2023 Oregon residential specialty code will closely align with the goals of the Executive Order 17-20. That was my testimony in support of the REACH code proposal. I do want to also comment here specifically on Kevin Duell's testimony. Kevin Duell's testimony refers to a specific NEEA analysis and research which he has referred to, and he's recommended some ducting requirements for the heat pump water heater. I would suggest the board to table that. This is a very complex topic. Our heat pump water heater program folks are closely involved, and we would want to dig back into the evaluation of the research which was undertaken to help make firm recommendations whether we need to prescribe requirements related specifically to the ducting or keep the code flexible at this point. So I would just suggest tabling this requirement for the next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Shilpa? Seeing none, we'll move on to our last oral testimony.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I just wanted to make a point. In my list of people signed up for testimony, I actually missed one person, Amy Cortese from the New Buildings Institute. Should be added to the list as well.
Amy Cortese? Okay, so is her name Amy Cortese? Is that correct?
Amy Cortese, I believe. I might be mispronouncing her last name.
Okay, I will. Amy, you're up. I'm going to move you up in front of Adam.
Great, thank you very much. So my name is Amy Cortese, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm Program Director at New Buildings Institute. We're a national nonprofit headquartered in Portland, Oregon. We work to catalyze the transition to healthy and energy efficient buildings through technical research, promotion of best practices in sustainable high performance buildings, and the development of energy codes and policies at the national, state, and local level. In December, my colleague at NBI submitted a REACH code proposal that would provide this performance approach that Mr. Heizer talked about earlier with an energy rating index. And before we submitted that proposal, our staff did a careful analysis to determine an ERI of 47 would be appropriate for Oregon. You may or may not recall the current value that's in the REACH code that you have now is 52 or 53, depending on climate zone. But our number 47 was a value that was published to match the IECC's 2021 version of Zero Energy Appendix, match the ASHRAE 90.2 proposals, look at other, other work in the country, including the New York stretch, and most importantly, approximate the value of the Zero Energy Ready Home O. So unfortunately, the REACH code language right now that was recommended by BCD changed this value from 47 to 53 or 52. And we think that this is this is not in accordance with, a more aggressive REACH code. In fact, the current 2021 IECC determinations are looking at an ERI of 54 for climate zone 4 and 55 for climate zone C 5. So it's really not that much better. And so we encourage you to retain the ERI value of 47 or, go no higher than a 50 as was determined by a careful analysis. So besides the suggested modification to the ERI number, NBI is supportive of the proposed REACH code as presented. We think it definitely provides a solid model for what could be later adopted as the 2023 potential code, and then incorporating the solar ready and EV ready provisions is also important. So thank you for your considerations and the opportunity to present.
Very good. Any questions for Amy? Okay. All right. We will finish now with Adam Hutchinson. 11:02, Adam.
Hello. Okay, so my comments are similar to Tonia Sorrell-Neal. They apply to ASHRAE 90.119 adoption. Is it appropriate to comment on that?
I think,
or should I hold off till tomorrow?
I think holding off till tomorrow is the right, if it's in line with that. And I don't think this particular gathering is the appropriate time to offer that. But I got to tell you, I love your mic. I got to get one like that. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay. I appreciate it.
I will hold off until tomorrow. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So that is the end. We've gotten through our oral testimony and we have written testimony. We move on to action, discussion and action. So jointly as the two boards, we have a couple motions that have been suggested to us that are in front of us to act on. Is this the proper time to bring this up, Debbie?
I'll let the policy analyst answer that, please.
Andy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this would be the proper time to discuss any additional topics on any additional items on this agenda item, and then end with a motion on the item.
Oh, can you read our options of motions that we have here, Andy?
Sure. You can move to recommend approval of the proposed 2021 ORRC to go into effect April 1st, 2021. With the finding that the added cost, if necessary, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants of the public or necessary to conserve scarce resources. Or you could make a motion to recommend amending and approving the proposed 2021 ORRC and include a recommended effective date in the motion with the finding that the added cost, if necessary, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants of the public or necessary to conserve scarce resources, with including the details of any amendments that you'd like to make in the motion. Or finally, you can make a motion to recommend disapproval of the proposed 2021 ORRC. And you'd be including specific reasons for disapproval in that motion.
And we do also have an option to table this. for our next
that would not require a motion. It would just be a decision to table it, and we would move it to an agenda type item on the next meeting for each board.
Okay. So would anybody have any concern that they would like to raise at this time for any amendment language? Yes, go ahead. Yeah, your name's not popping up, so I'm just going to say go ahead. I saw your hand.
Gary Hakenin.
Gary.
For the record. Seems to me we need to decide on whether we table this before we get into any discussions around amending a REACH code that we might table. I suggest that we make a decision whether we're going to table this or not. Otherwise, the discussion just doesn't make any sense at this point in time. I guess the question would be are there any significant issues with tabling the decision at this point in time? And maybe that's a question for the division.
That's perfectly fine with me. I just thought we would get into some discussion, and maybe some amendment discussion would get us there. Personally, I am in favor of tabling and postponing a decision and providing the legislature any direction at this point in time. I would rather see what the legislature tells us to do. We'll throw that out there for comments.
Yeah, through the chair, this is Travis Argue. I 100% support that idea. I think that's the most sensible way of going about this.
Anyone else?
Through the chair, I'm Rabi Tamahulat, and I agree with Jay. I think we should wait and see what the result of the legislation, and decide what to do with the code.
Right.
Through the chair, this is Eli Volum. I have the same question that Gary just posed. If we do table it, does it cause any problems for Building Codes Division or any other entities?
Through the chair, thanks. No, that's why we came to you today, was to kind of figure out what to do. I think you understand the position we're in. So if the recommendation is to wait until after session and see what happens and come back to you, that doesn't create any issues for us. We can certainly do that.
Yeah, I just feel that the timing of this couldn't be any more wrong. This particular two boards and joint meeting of these two boards, we're not a political entity. And in effect, the political entity is asking us to support some legislation one way or the other, or make a political indication. And that's not our purpose. Anyone else?
Matt Rosell, through the chair, I agree we should table this.
I also agree through the chair that we should table this.
This is John Camiller. I agree. Do we need a motion to table?
I was just going to say, do we have a motion to table at this point in time?
I make a motion to table the question before us until the next meeting.
I second that motion.
All those in favor of the motion before this joint committee, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? Debbie, we seem to have a consensus on tabling and postponing commitment from this committee, just this joint committee.
That's fair, Mr. Chair.
There being no announcements, I am going, the chair, Chair Hansen. There being no further business, this audio combined board meeting of the Construction Industry Energy Board and the Residential and Manufacturer Structure Board meeting is now adjourned, and I have at 11:09.